Welcome back to Highly Respected. I'm your host, Scott Greer, and today we're going to have another fantastic and incredible episode for you guys. So sit back and enjoy. And today we are going to be talking about Trump because Trump has been a little disappointing in recent days. So we're going to be talking about that and addressing this argument that the worse is better, and that if Trump loses or if conservatives lose or whoever loses, Republicans, whoever claims to represent us lose, then it makes things better because it accelerates and it wakes up people. And we need people to wake up. And the only way that they can wake up is if we keep losing. This is a common argument I keep hearing. So just to state, this is all of today's topics are going to be from IQ, or not IQ supplement, kind of elite questions. So we've got a lot today to talk about. And this question comes from IPA Enjoyer. He was wanting me to address Trump's statement saying that he wants to staple green cards to diplomas for all the foreign students in American universities. So I will address that point first, and then we'll go into the worse is better topic that I've been seeing a lot more of. In any case, when this came, this is bad. Trump saying this is bad. This is what partially inspired the Great War against Charlie Kirk, is when he was saying he was using the exact same language about stapling green cards to diplomas, and that's the solution to the immigration issue. And Trump shouldn't say it. And Trump has said similar things before. I think he said a lot of these things in like 2019. He made some fake statements. And so it is bad. It's worth criticizing him. And how to criticize I'll get to in the moment, or how we come at this angle, and how we're supposed to address criticizing him, because some people are like, well, you shouldn't criticize him at all because we're in a presidential election campaign, you can't criticize him. I think when he does something wrong like this, or he says a viewpoint that we strongly disagree with, you should come out there and say, hey, we're Trump supporters, we don't like this. But with all that in mind, that it's bad. I first need to say, if you need an explanation for why it's bad, because some listeners might want to know this. The last thing we need in America is more Asian immigration from China and India. And what this is primarily going to serve as is a way to give Chinese and Indians, permanent residency. And also it takes away jobs from middle-class Americans. This is not taking jobs away from people like, oh, there's no one who will want to do this job. They have sort of an argument with fruit picking and stuff. They don't have an argument for the good jobs that these immigrants would be taking, middle-class jobs that are not going to be denied to native-born Americans. And they're just going to hog them up. And a lot of times they're not going to have full residential status or not full citizenship status. And maybe they can work for lower wages than actual citizens. It's a similar reason why they use the H-1B visa, because the H-1B visa, they can get these guys for dirt cheap and work wages that no American would ever consider. And that's why all these tech companies hire these guys. Now this is like saying, oh, we can get these guys and then promise them a green card afterwards. Let's go. And so all these tech investors would love that. And that's why Trump even made this statement, because he's in a podcast with a bunch of venture capitalists, one of whom's Indian. And of course, they're going to be like, oh yeah, this is a great idea. More foreign labor for us. And so they're, of course, going to be wanting Trump to say this. And I think Trump's made this comment in a way to just please who he's talking to, which he has this unfortunate tendency to always do that. He tailors his message to the audience. And he sees these guys as venture capitalists who are raising money for him. The Indian guy was part of Chamath, was part of a fundraiser for Trump recently, as was David Sachs. I think maybe all these guys were in it. But they want, this is their immigration plan that they want. And so Trump is like, okay, sure, I'll be into this. But he always says this stuff to various people. He'll just say, oh yeah, we're going to do this idea. And then he has zero interest in actually acting upon it. And the people would be advising him on immigration policy in the administration would not advise him to do this. And also, he can't do this by executive order. He would have to pass legislation to get this through. And there is no way Congress would or I don't want to say no way, but there's not a strong chance that Congress would even pass such a bill. One, Republicans have become much better on this issue, and especially something that can be seen as rewarding immigrants over native-born Americans, such as stapling green cards to diplomas. It would be very unpopular to do this. Now, there would be certain lobbies for this. Obviously, the Indian lobby, which was advocating for changes to how they allocated visas, because this was I think it was the Fairness for Workers Act. It was something. This is a few years ago where Indian lobby were strongly pushing for this immigration bill to change how they allocate visas so they could gobble up more of the visas that we hand out. Because generally, most countries are restricted in how many visas they can get, and Indians wanted to change so they could take more of the visas. Any case, there were some other things with it that were bad. They would probably be strongly advocating for this because this would mean more Indians and would be able to stay here permanently and transform America. But the conversation around Republicans is much different. And also Democrats don't really aren't that keen on these guest worker and plans that are directly tied to taking jobs away from Americans. I mean, they will do this stuff for illegals. I mean, they will want to have more. They obviously want amnesty. They obviously want these bills. But something of that nature is going to not be popular with Americans. And a lot of Democrats will say this is a gift to big business, which it would be. You would still have a lot of Democrats for it. I'm not saying all the Democrats would be for it, but they would not want to do this type of bill with Trump. And there would be a large amount of resistance from Republicans. First off, and another problem is conservative media would be extremely hostile towards it. House Freedom Caucus and the conservatives would be very hostile towards it. And they would not, Trump is going to be leaning on a lot of these very conservative factions during his presidency. And it would be, they couldn't sell this to conservatives. And Trump would back off it. He would not try to pursue this as his legislation because he would not get a political benefit from it. He would piss off his base if he did this. He would piss off conservative media, and it would be seen as a gift to Democrats. And I just don't think he would ever actually realistically propose this bill. He may, I think there is a chance he could, in an interview like 2 years later, 2 years from now when he's president, maybe say like, oh yeah, sure. And then he doesn't do anything about it. So he can't do an executive order about it. So if in case he ever, had this idea in his head, he can't implement it that way. And his advisors would tell him not to do that. Second, he would have to get this through Congress. And I'm doubtful that it could get through Congress due to conservative opposition, primarily conservative opposition, but I don't think it would go down as well with Democrats as you might expect. They do sometimes find an interest in resisting this. And probably the real reason the Democrats would not pass this is that they would try to add additional liberalization of immigration law that would be unacceptable to conservatives. Like they would demand an amnesty for whole swaths of different people, or some are an increase in green cards overall. They would not, they would find a way around this. This is another issue, is that they would have to raise the number of green cards that we issue. If all these college students are there, and if they count the number, and then you're increasing immigration by 50,000 per year, it might not be that high. It could be higher. I'd have to look at how many foreigners are graduating from American colleges every year. And the number is estimated at 100,000. Trump, the fact that he would increase immigration by 100,000, and also the fact that a significant number of these guys would be Chinese, the conservatives would flip their shit. There would be a lot of opposition towards it, and Trump would back off. He doesn't want to piss off his core supporters with this. So I would not worry about it actually happening. I don't think it would happen. I just don't think about the nature of how the Republican Party and conservative media approach immigration now, how Trump would not get a political victory out of this. He doesn't need to please these venture capitalists that much. He doesn't need to give them that. They can just, they realize things are better under Trump than Biden. he doesn't owe them this. And so he's not going to get a big political victory out of this. All he is going to suffer an uproar and a revolt from his own people. So that's not that's going to happen. At the same time, he shouldn't be saying this because he's on a presidential campaign. He's trying to rally up his core supporters. And he should be making a bold statement to these venture capitalists like, no, we are going to put Americans first. We do not want to give more Chinese and Indians green cards. We want to actually reduce the number of foreign students in American universities. Because a lot of these students, particularly Chinese, are stealing our secrets and doing other terrible and doing nefarious things by getting into into our universities and into our country, and we want to limit that. No, so we want to put Americans first. We don't want to staple green cards to diplomas. We want to actually start restricting the foreign student population instead. I think would have been the statement he should have made, but instead he made this statement, which obviously deserves criticism. Now, when we criticize Trump, there are, as going to this point of those people who say, oh, you shouldn't criticize Trump at all. We're in a presidential campaign. There's too much at risk. Oh, he's just doing politics. When he does something really bad like this or says something really bad, he deserves criticism from his supporters. And the best way to make it sure this is heard is to demonstrate that, like, hey, we are the MAGA base. We are strong Trump supporters. We backed you in 2016 and 2020. And this is not America First. This is not MAGA. This is not what we're signing up for. We want you to put the MAGA agenda first. And MAGA agenda is not mandating green cards to diplomas. That's not putting Americans first. And so if you present your arguments as saying, hey, we are strong Trump supporters and we don't like this. This goes against what we believe is America First. And if you make a social media push about this and conservative media criticizes him, Trump gets the message and backs off from it. And his campaign backed off, tried to back away from this when they issued a statement like, oh, well, only strongly vetted and a select number of them would get this. Stuff like that. They had to back off because they know the base is upset about this. So this is, the base is, if it's strategic and tactical in how they criticize Trump, that's how you make your message heard. And if you present yourself as a Trump supporter criticizing him, the weight of that criticism matters more. If it's, diehard DeSantoids and other folk who are not wanting to vote for Trump at all and are just saying, I'm done with Trump, maybe if you're saying I'm done with Trump unless he changes this, that's maybe not the most productive way of saying this, or just going full on anti-Trump. I don't think you should go full on anti-Trump from this, but you should. It's warranted criticism. I don't, we are not paid by the campaign, okay? We are not, people criticizing him on Twitter and in conservative media isn't going to hurt him in the election. It sends a message to him about what messaging we want to hear and what policies we want to see when he's president. And you have to make that clear to him in order to have that type of influence. Now, if you clap like a seal for everything he says, then he can do whatever he wants. And a lot of conservative media and a lot of Trump supporters, when he was president, did this all the time. No matter what stupid thing he did, they would clap like seals and would refuse to criticize him. And then they would get just mad. And they were like 4D chess, the 4D chess mode. No matter what he was doing, they would just like, oh, you don't understand. I remember when he was wasting all this political capital to get ASAP Rocky out of the Swedish jail. And I was like, this is idiotic. Why is he doing this? And then all these Trump supporters are like, oh, it's 4D chess. He's winning over the black vote. And he's standing up to tyrannical foreign governments or something. And I was like, this is not your job to defend this. Okay, you can criticize it. Now, was that an important deal? No. But it's still, worthy of criticism. At the same time, sometimes people went too far in criticizing him. The alt-right decided that they're going to be an anti-Trump movement and ensure that they're irrelevant because they only became relevant by being tied to Trump. And then when they're like, we're all anti-Trump, people stopped paying attention to him and they lost a lot of their core following because most of these guys were pro-Trump because they realized, like, what other choice do we have? And the alt-right's like, don't worry, we're going to have other candidates. And they never ran any other candidates. or any other serious candidates. I guess Paul Nehlen got destroyed in all his primary races. So there was nobody that they had to back. And most of these guys then decided to pretend they like Biden or Bernie, which is just idiotic. Which it's just that resentment that Trump didn't make them like press secretary or something, which was never going to happen. Any case, that was going full on anti-Trump made that message. No one paid attention to that message because it only matters when it's saying like, hey, we're core Trump supporters, we're your base, and we don't like this. And you tie yourself in with MAGA and America First, and that's how you make your message heard. And so it's a loyal opposition towards Trump, whereas like we still support Trump, we want him to succeed, and that's why we don't like this policy, because this is going to make him have a failed presidency. This is going to ensure he doesn't succeed. And so that's how you couch your criticism and make it most effective. And there are a lot of times during the Trump administration where people just fell on the two different poles of response, where it's like we're full on anti-Trump because of something he did, some foreign policy decision he made, or he's sounding like he wants more immigrants, so we're now anti-Trump. And then there were the people who, no matter what he said, they would clap like seals. And a lot of those people who clap like seals, no matter what he did, then became anti-Trump and were DeSantoids. And now they're moving back to being pro-Trump and the seal clappers, clapping seals rather. And so you don't want to do that. So you got to have a nice middle ground where, you praise him when he's good and you criticize him when he's not good, but you're always saying we're still a Trump supporter. Now, there could be something he does really bad where it'd be like, okay, now we're just not supporting Trump. If he, for some reason, very unlikely he would do this, said, we're going to give amnesty to all the illegal immigrants here. Okay, and he actually seriously pursues that. Then you would go into anti-Trump territory. But he's not going to do that. That'd be violating his campaign pledge. He's running on mass deportations. He's not going to do, and the grounds to do that are no longer there among Republicans. People always worried about that when he was president, that he might try to do something like that because he's the only one who could get it passed. He's not going to do this, okay? But that would be something like that. And so you got to make serious demands when you're wanting to, when you're criticizing him and you're like, hey, we want something to say this. Because I know a lot of people have been criticizing him on foreign policy lately. And I think Nick Fuentes, he was saying, he's been very critical of Trump. And he was saying, like, I think one time recently he's like, here's a demand that we want him to meet. It's like a pledge to not invade Iran, not to go to war to Iran. I think that's a perfectly sensible and legitimate demand to make of Trump, to say like, hey, we want these pledges made so you're ensured to be a good president. So we're supporting you. And that's another way to couch criticism is like, hey, we want a pledge for this so we back you because our Trump supporters. We've got a lot of energy. We've got a lot, we backed you in the past and helped you win in the past. So we would like you to say, that make this pledge in order to ensure we know you're going to be a great president. And so I think making those types of demands or criticisms is how you make your message heard and convey your message as strong as possible. And there are other areas that I wanted, because we're going to be a more critical Trump episode. This will be one critical episode of Trump. I think one of his errors that he's doing right now is he's doing a lot of this like wasteful black outreach, which he'll probably get double-digit black support, which is like 12-13% or so, maybe 15%. But a lot of that could be used more effectively. And instead of like in the past where it's like, oh, we're presenting upstanding black guys in suits and stuff, he's instead doing rallies with rappers. There was an NBC article last week talking about his outreach to black rappers, and all of them are making the wrong message. They're like, yo, we love Trump. He let black people out of jail, and that's awesome. And it's like, all right, if you're running on law and order message and how this crime is rising, I don't think it's good to draw attention to how you release some of these people under the First Step Act or pardon a lot of these criminals. Let's learn from our lesson and not try to appeal to Kim Kardashian, who was the one pushing a lot of this criminal justice reform stuff and these pardons. Let's not try to appeal to black rappers with long rap sheets, okay? That's not how we're going to win an election. This really creates the vibe of the insane clown party when you have these I mean, some of the rappers he did a rally with have been accused of serious crimes. I think they have charges pending against them. And it's like, look, you need to win over middle class white people, like college educated white people. We need to learn to figure out how to win them back. And campaigning with convicted rappers, who've been accused of serious crimes, probably not the way to win them over. Now, I do think that there is one thing. I don't think he should try to really hard cultivate this, but the fact that a lot of rappers are endorsing him does signify a cultural shift that's happening, and that the young people don't have this real revulsion and horror around Trump that millennials had 10 years ago, or not 10, 8 years ago, and during his administration when he was there. I mean, they're like, all the cultural sphere felt like, he's a Nazi and we're going to have fascist dictatorship. Now, if you have all these fairly popular rappers endorsing him and saying he's awesome and then doing TikToks about him, that's like indicating that there's a cultural shift, that they're not that bothered by Trump. They might not vote for him, but they're not going to, be strongly motivated to vote for Biden in the case. They'll just stay home, or they might just vote for him because it's like, well, he seems cooler than Biden. Might work in that regard. But at the same time, I think doing rallies with him and really putting a lot of money into and effort into the outreach, I don't think it's going to pay off the dividends that they imagine. Because they always say, like, well, the black outreach is about assuring middle-class whites that it's not racist to support a Republican, which usually that was how it is in the past. But a lot of middle-class whites, middle-aged, don't want to be reminded that maybe don't want to be reminded that he's a convicted felon, and don't want to be hanging around like other convicted felons. They want a more respectable image. So I think that is a bit of a waste of time with that. So I think that, like, fine to criticize him on. And I mean, to conclude this part of it, there is room to criticize Trump. For me, think, I'm going to primarily support him in my content and my tweets and my podcasts and my writing. I've made that decision because I know that there's no other real option besides Trump. And Trump presents the opportunity to change the status quo and shake it up. And we can accomplish a lot of things if he's president again. And we have a lot of opportunities if he's president again. And so all this stuff pales in comparison to those opportunities. And so that's why I'm still very pro-Trump. He is going to occasionally say stupid stuff. He's going to occasionally make unwise decisions in the campaign. And we can say, like, hey, and if it's something that rises up to the level of stapling green cards to diplomas, then it's right to criticize him. I personally don't think it's, to criticize everything he does wrong or, really lose my mind over it. When it is something as bad as that, then yeah, it's warranted to do that to send a message. But I personally don't want to do that. Outside of something like that, the stapling green cards to diplomas, because I'm still a Trump supporter. I still want him to win. I'm still very pro-Trump, but when it's called for, you don't need to be a cheerleader for him. Now that brings us to the argument about worse is better, is that we should want Trump to lose. Because if he wins, it's going to lull white Americans into a sleep again, and they're never going to want to do anything about what's going on in the world. Is that they're going to ignore all the problems and think everything's solved, which is just not true. But in any case, this is an argument that I'm starting to see a lot. I saw this guy who is Serbian, so I'm like, why are you discussing about that? And he's acting like he's an American with a lot of these accounts, and it's like, it's none of your business at the end of the day. I mean, it could be his business if, America was, in like the 90s, intervening into Serbia, but we're not going to, likely Serbia, a Trump administration would be much friendlier to a Serbia that's going its own path than a Biden administration. So I don't know. In any case, these people, all these guys just live in American politics. There's tons of people who are live in other countries and all they do is tweet about American politics. But it's like, you got to be in America and understand America before you do this. I'm thinking of someone like Tink Sorg, Malcolm Cuyuni, who he finally once approached America, but his idea of what America is entirely shaped by crazies on the internet. Malcolm Cuyuni is a guy who writes for Compact. He's this half-black guy living in Sweden, and he has like the most idiotic commentary about America because he just doesn't understand the country. In any case, back to this argument. The guy is saying, Trump's so bad, but we need to wake people up. And so if things get really bad, then people will wake up once they, and we rip the mask off. And so that we're losing so badly that the elections no longer work and we're going to start a revolution. And this is just not how things work. I'm going to say this. We got Biden. We already had Biden for roughly 4 years. We've had open borders. We've had a full-on invasion throughout his presidency. We've had him saying things about American heritage and white supremacy and making Juneteenth a holiday and all these things. And with all this combined, the American people are less politicized and less, desiring of a revolution or anything than they were in the late 2010s. They weren't even there, but, it was a hyper-politicized moment. But it's like, you're like, we need people to wake up. Under Biden, they've gone back to sleep. A lot of people. Conservatives are better, but that's not the majority of people. The majority of people, and particular young men, are going back to sleep. Now, the conservatives who care about this, young conservatives, are much better. But the average young man, what do they care about? They care about sports betting. They care about Morgan Wallen. They care about all this. They don't care about what's going on in politics. They don't care about the open border. They don't care about any of the issues that we're really set on or we really want people to care about. They're just enjoying life, which is whatever. But they're not waking up because the thing is, people only wake up not because, we lost and we're going to turn to radical solutions proposed by online anons who are not going to do any of these radical solutions. They're just going to keep posting. They're just going to zone out of politics and focus on all their interests. That's what happens when things get worse, is instead of people, and if there's not a clear alternative, which none of these people saying that worse is better have an alternative, they just imagine that if things get so bad that magically, normies will be like, hello, online autist, lead us. We support all your radical ideas now. And they're like, oh, wow, it works. And then these guys, I guess in Serbia, are going to lead the American people to freedom of some sort. And that's what people imagine. Well, that's not what's going to happen. If people feel politics is hopeless, if people feel that nothing gets done, instead of saying, I'm going to turn to revolution, they're just going to focus on other things. Because unless America's prosperity was taken away, they have the option, they have the privilege of just focusing on something else. Because if you've got a roof over your head, you've got food in a refrigerator, you've got a job, you've got, some entertainment options, you're not going to likely be a revolutionary. Revolutions and radical change only happens when people are struggling to have roofs over their head, struggling to feed themselves, can't find a job, period. Which I know everyone likes. I know there's problems with employment out there, but it's not like Weimar or 1917 Russia, okay? We're not having people starve to death on the streets. There is some economic problems, but it's like standard economic problems we've always had in America. We've had times of high unemployment. We've had times of, people, struggling to make ends meet. But to real radical is when that whole prosperity is taken away, and also the country feels threatened by some outside force, like say communism is there, or there's a foreign enemy that's threatening to conquer parts of America, which we don't have any of that. We don't have a radical ideology from the left that people feel threatened by. Biden's just a standard libtard. Okay, he's not a communist. He sucks, and in some ways you could argue maybe in some ways worse, but he's not a communist. There's not this fear that there could be a radical left to take over, and then they're going to take your private property away, and they're going to take all your money away. Now, libtards do want to propose some higher taxes, but it's not quite like what the communists were doing. So you don't have that fear, and you don't have a fear of a foreign enemy taking over parts of America. China, is going to take over Taiwan. That's the main worry, which Taiwan, not a part of America. Now, if they were threatening Hawaii or California, some people may want to allow them to take California. But they were actually threatening, parts of America and gobbling that up. And the government's not doing anything about it, then people would be put in a more radical position. And if they're very poor and, there's no jobs available and all these people don't have enough money to spend on sports betting, then they would be more radical. But people will just go back to sleep. I think, we've already had 4 years of Biden. We're not, conservatism has moved in a better direction. But I think if you just have 4 more years of losing, you don't create the right mindset to actually do anything. Because if people just get blackpilled and they're like, oh, voting's useless, politics is useless, and then they're like, we just need a revolution, it just turns into a video game. It's like people come on, they shit post, they're not going to do anything in real life, and then they go about their normal day of things. But there's no organizing, there's no alternative proposed. People are just blackpilling each other on the internet. And imagining that more people are waking up because on Twitter, which is, there's a lot of bots and not real people. And there's also a lot of foreigners on there too. And it's hard to understand who are real Americans actually liking your posts. You can look at some posts and they're all liked by porn bots. So it's like the porn bots are waking up. They're gonna win, I guess, with them. So that's what you have to keep in mind. I think a lot of people, they go online and they build these fantasy worlds around them. Actually, I know. They build these fantasy worlds around them, and then they talk within their own bubble of what the bubble wants to hear. And if you try to burst the bubble, they get very angry with what you're saying. I mean, it goes into this conversation I was having over the weekend about dating advice, where a certain person, Shag Bark or Hickman, was arguing that the way to find a woman is to go to truck stops all over the country, rural truck stops far away from where people live, and find all the beautiful women there. And simply pointing it out that that is a horrible idea and there are like no beautiful young single women at these places, then it's usually either an immigrant or a middle-aged woman who's not very attractive, to say the least. And they want people, when you simply say, I don't think this is good advice, people like froth at the mouth and lose their minds at this. And they just, because you're bursting the bubble, people created the fantasy realm. And so there's all these different types of fantasy realms on there, that people are, revolution's around the corner. White revolution or something is around the corner. And it's just, we just got to keep posting, even though there's no real world organization or real world a lot of activism for that solution, but people just post all about it, and it's something, it's their little video game that they have. So people want to play pretend revolutionaries and talk to other people and like, we're waking people up, but you're waking up some people, but you gotta remember, you're not waking up the masses. You're waking up the select number of people who are on Twitter. And that's something, but people then overstate how much that can lead to. Look at what the alt-right happened. The alt-right was like, oh, we're ready for revolution. It's Weimar. And then all the amount of people they could conjure up at Charlottesville is 1,000 people. That's not a mass movement. And that's not anything that's going to overthrow any type of regime. So you got to think realistically. And as I said before, Trump's the best option. But going to this like worse is better, it's like it's a cope for losing. And so it's just trying to find the silver lining in losing. And it's like, well, Now that people know there's no hope, they're going to really turn to radicalism. And that doesn't always work. I'll bring up a Serbian example. Serbia got completely fucked in the 90s by, NATO and US government for their actions. And what did happen? Did this turn Serbia into a super base state that then conquered all of Yugoslavia? No, they just lost, and then they handed over all their leaders to international tribunals. They overthrew Milosevic, who was responsible for this. And now they have a government, if you're very into, anti-empire or trying to wanting to build a multipolar world, which I'm not as convinced that is the best solution at this moment. I don't think unipolarity that we have right now is the best either. But I'm more skeptical that that's going to lead to a based West, or a keyed West rather, as some people said, and I used to think as well. But if you're into that, Serbia's current Serbian government is moving in that direction. But they lost, and it's not what happened for them. The people didn't wake up for losing. Now, granted, losing a war is very different than losing an election, but it's still the same thing. It's like, oh, we lose our ability to influence policy, we lose our power, and then some way we're gonna overturn this by radicalizing ourselves in a ghetto is then really gonna make the regime shake. That doesn't really happen. You have to have other factors in play there. You have to have a mass understanding of what these problems are, what people who are accelerationists are articulating this position. Their position is not reaching the masses. The masses is like, we don't really believe in all this stuff, this crazy stuff. We're just wanting fewer immigrants, and that it's like very basic stuff that they have. And if they feel like they can't stop any of this, as I'm repeating myself, but it really has to be said, if they feel that they can't do anything within the system, that doesn't, unless they're really poor, and there's a significant number of them who are poor and desperate and hungry, and their lives really are horrible outside of politics, and there's a large percentage of these type of people, and they feel that there's something even greater, or there's something really threatening to their livelihood, or what little of their livelihood they have, like communism, then they will turn to radicalism that seeks to defend what is their way of life. But a lot of the radicalism is about overturning these people's way of lives too. So it's which a lot of the interwar fascist movements we're not trying to do, but the movements that we have now are all about like overturning people's livelihood, and it's like making them poorer anyway with some of their ideas. As you can tell, this is not a good argument. Too much of online commentary just imagines, if we just sit back and something bad happens, then people will eventually wake up. And a lot of times it's like, people, you have to work active. You just can't hope for this grand event, that's going to solve everything to just happen, and then they'll put you in power, which is always like the meme. It's like, once the system collapses, then my niche ideology can take power. And that's pretty much how everyone operates in. And this is how this argument worse is better works out. Who's to say your ideology is going to win out? Maybe communism becomes more prevalent, and it's like anti-white communism. How do you know it's going to be there? Because if you're not the one organizing, if you're not the one out there actually reaching normies and actually presenting them a serious alternative, then why are they going to turn to you? So it's just a cope that people indulge in. But even it doesn't even apply to Trump. It doesn't apply to this 2024 election. We've already seen what happened 4 years under Biden. Things just got really bad, and most people went to sleep. So under Trump, things change. The system is shaken up, and also presents to people the opportunity that they can actually make a difference, that they can actually win. Even if he wins, and he doesn't even really quite accomplish all we imagined he would do, the fact that people voted for him, voted for a change, indicates that Americans want that type of change promised by Trump. And it indicates to people that there is hope, that there is, you can't just give up on everything now. Now you may say like, well, maybe elections aren't the way to do that. But you still need to win elections to indicate you have popular support. And there's that there is a base for that type of change. And that they can be white-pilled and have a positive attitude that they can make a difference. And elections still do matter. I mean, it's, there's a huge difference between Trump and Biden being in office. And with Trump in office, things move in our direction. People wake up to our ideas because, without Trump, nobody would have given a shit about the alt-right. The only reason the alt-right was a thing was because of Trump. We don't have a mass following. We only get a mass following by tying ourselves to larger political phenomena that everyone is familiar with, like Trump. We can still be critical of Trump. I think being a loyal opposition to Trump, if he moves in a different direction, is the right move to make. At the same time, you still have to be within that fold in order to make your voice heard and to start to attract more people to what you believe and to your cause. You have to have a serious alternative to Trump, or a clear idea of what you want people to do for why Trump loses and what will happen. And most people just go into a land of magical thinking when this happens. The alternative of just posting all day is not a real alternative to electing a president. And the alternative to this is just posting all day and just hoping that the memes become reality. But I can guarantee that the memes will not become reality in this decade or probably anytime soon. You have to have hope for all their differences. But even if those real changes happen, who's to say that a really bad ideology isn't what comes out in the forefront in that chaos? So this is all things to keep in mind. And so that's why I'm very dismissive of accelerationism and worse is better. Worse is usually just worse. And it's usually just a cope for losing and just trying to find the silver lining. But generally, things just go bad and get worse. And the people, American prosperity keeps people from waking up. If they feel that there's no real opportunities in politics, they'll focus on video games, they'll focus on sports betting. They'll do what they're doing right now under Biden. And they'll do the same under another 4 years of Biden. The only way to really wake up people and to shake things up is to actually get some victories and to actually have some wins to white pill and get people optimistic and having the feeling that they can do something in politics and to unite with a large masses and a base of people to make America great again. And so that is my viewpoint on that. So we've got a few questions to answer. We've got, and this is coming from the Cod Lead. I got to get my pitch. As a reminder, you too can get the power to ask me questions or suggest topics. Some people were saying guests. We can suggest guests. I mean, most people don't suggest guests. I haven't had many guests on before. I prefer just talking here. Sometimes we're going to have like one or two guests later on in the year. But if you really have a great guest idea, go for it. But in any case, if you have questions or topics you'd like to suggest, sign up for the Cod Lead option at Highly Respected Substack, and that's at highly-respected.com. And make sure to sign up for the IQ supplements if you haven't already. And so we've got most of that topic was based around IPA enjoyer, asking about Trump's green card idea. Now we're moving on to Werner. Werner had two questions. The first question is, Scott, would you say we are seeing a new syncretic ad hoc political philosophy incorporating post-65 immigrant modes of life and behaviors into American conservatism? Is this going to be Magga post-Trump? I guess you mean post-whiteness or a type of post-white culture type of thing being merged into Magga. And yeah, there is a little bit. Magga is way more diverse. Well, I don't know if way more diverse than it was in 2016. In 2016, it really did feel more like the white backlash. But now when we're seeing, the Bronx rally, I knew people who went to the Bronx rally and they're like, yeah, white. Well, we even had a report from the Bronx rally and he's like, whites were the minority at the crowd. And, that area is not likely going to be his base, but there are way more non-whites going to these events. And the type of MAGA energy of some parts of it are different than what you would imagine white culture is. MAGA rap is an important part of, well, I don't know. It is a part of the MAGA culture now. All of them do raps. I mean, the Valentina Gomez lady did her own horrible rap. When she's running for office, there is this guy. There's been other candidates who've produced rap songs who have been the MAGA candidates. Some of them been serious candidates, and and now there's all these rappers around it, and there's there's this flashiness around Trump. There's this weird video where this white woman with a black guy, and they're in bling bling, and this is how dated I am. I know they don't say bling bling anymore, but they are in a sports car, and they're all about MAGA, and she's just talking in Ebonics, another old term. I prefer Ebonics over AAVE. And the black guy's like, yo, Trump, 2024. I don't know if this is post-65 immigrant modes of life. It's black influence, but a lot of the guys who are into it are also Hispanic or white. And it's moving beyond, it's moving beyond typical wiggerdom in that they're not sharing, these concerns about the black man being oppressed and how bad it is, and voting Democrat or voting for reparations. Instead, you're voting for Republicans, which is still extremely white-coded, especially Trump. But the way they dress and conduct themselves and the way they talk, it's very different from ways middle-class white people talked and conducted themselves. And so that's like what you're seeing in parts of MAGA. And could this become more to the forefront of you're seeing candidates like the guy Royce White running for office who speaks in AAVE. He's a former NBA basketball player, and he's also a former BLM leader, and he's like, yo, I'm against the establishment. And all these MAGA people are like that. I do think you could see more people like Royce White run. Whether that's like post-65 immigrant, because a lot of these guys aren't really immigrants. Now, there are running more immigrants candidates in these areas. I mean, a lot of the candidates that are running in California are all immigrant backgrounds. Even in Northern Virginia and some places like that where there's a high immigrant community, they're running a ton of immigrants. They had two competitive races in Northern Virginia, and one guy, they had an Asian, I think it was Vietnamese or Cambodian, and the other race, they had a Hispanic woman. Both lost. The Asian guy didn't have much of a chance, but they thought, well, it might be a really good year and they could win. The Hispanic woman was supposed to win against Abigail Spanberger, but she lost. And in those races, in the 2010s, they would have been running a standard white guy. That's what they always ran. They ran a standard white guy, middle-class white guy. Now they're turning to immigrants to running these races that are more diverse. And so you're going to see... So that's like the part of the establishment side, the political side, is that you're going to see more Hispanics and Asians, Southeast Asians in particular, run for these races, especially in diverse areas, and that they feel that's the only way they can compete. And along with the conservative media sphere, you're going to see more Forgiato Blow and this type of post-white behavior with that. Now, it could all change. I don't think this is like the majority of the culture. I just think it's a kind of annoying part of the culture that you can make fun of and push back that we shouldn't put this at the forefront, we shouldn't have it on stage. But what people choose to do, you're sometimes don't really have the power to control that. And it is like really funny content. At the same time, you don't want that on stage. You don't want to promote that as like the face of your movement and what you're about. You want to be standing up for whiteness and white culture. And Forgiato Blow, despite being white, is not that. He is post-white. That's how most people don't realize he is white, but yes, he is. So that's some of the things. But it's even like it's even a beyond MAGA thing. It's just like the entire right now. And then people who will criticize this is like conservatives would have loved to have this amount of diversity. They would have just died and thought they went to heaven if they saw saw the amount of diversity at a Trump rally. But then they don't like the elements because it's uncouth, and they're for Trump, and they'd rather that they be for Paul Ryan, and which they would never be. So it's just a part of the Trump package. I'm not the biggest fan of it. But as long as Trump and others are at the wheel and that they're directing it in a positive identity issue direction, like Trump mostly is doing despite his recent foray into wanting more green cards, then it's just something that comes with the territory. But you don't want the carnival, the post-white carnival, to become the central focus. And without Trump, there's a possibility that happens. So now moving to a second question. Should the right reintroduce economic concerns as a main cornerstone of policy? Do DC Beltway drifters and dissident right morons have the capability to understand that most populist economic policy doesn't work and harms their base in the long and short term? It depends on what your economic or economic. He said ex. I don't know if he was. I'm going to say there was a typo, but economic concerns, and he should they reintroduce? Well, it's always important to talk about economics, but in all the studies, generally what the ordinary people want is like economy bad, I'm going to solve this somehow. They don't really care about the details of how you're going to solve it. They just want you to do something, and if it encourages job growth and leads to them having higher incomes, they're happy. So they're not that tied into economic policy as much as the pundits wish they were. So that's just the dynamic you have. It's still, it's still economic concerns are a big part of what people talk about, but it is a lot of times stupid because they imagine we have a different base than we do. They imagine even the working class don't like higher taxes. They do not want socialism. They do not want social democracy for their interests, because a lot of these guys, a lot of them are small business owners. They pay a lot in taxes. They like the independent. They like independence. They don't like to be more dependent on the government. And this is a core part of Trump's base. And so they don't want, more government intervention in their lives. We used to mock this as, conning, conservatism, but this is what the base feels like. And there isn't as much of a constituency for, Bernie Sanders plus immigration restriction, as you would imagine. Because all these people felt like, oh, that's what working class whites really like. No, they just really want somebody to address their issues and to act like they, and resonate with them, which is what Trump did. And so a lot of people thought like, oh, well, Trump, it's all the economic anxiety. It's these economic populism that's why he won these voters. No, he addressed immigration. He addressed political correctness. He addressed the feeling of cultural dispossession that this class feels. And he presented himself as a wildly entertaining figure who who knew how to appeal to them. And that's why he was popular. It had very little to do with the economics. Now, but outside of being opposed to cutting entitlements, that's the type of thing. I think economics concerns should just be a very broad field of topic, and we're open to other things. I think there could be a lot of debate between more libertarian economics versus populist economics. That's fine, but there's almost a case where we have too much economics or too much economic concerns, and it turns into social democracy a la Sohrab Ahmari and some of these guys. And they then start ignoring the identity issues. So the identity issues for commentary should be at the forefront. And when economics come into place, you then turn into libertarians and they're like, well, we need to have more open borders for it's the economy. Or they go into social democracy. It's like, oh, we need to protect the jobs of the multiracial working class. So identity issues should always be at the forefront of what we discuss. But when it comes to Republicans, they need to address economic issues when they're running for office. But it should be a broad way of viewing it and basically saying Democrats are bad for economics. We're good for economics. And then deliver on better economic results for the people. The core standard for what economic policy should be is delivering and securing the interests, or delivering results and securing the interests of middle American whites. And that should always be the focus, not trying to protect, uphold multiracial working class at the expense of middle class whites. Middle class, working class whites should be the primary focus, and their economic interests should be secured and protected and advanced. And that's what should be the primary focus of any economic policies we have. Next up is a question from Fake Cell Eradicator. He's got two questions. He says, on the topic of counterintuitive theories, observations, I agree with your theory from a recent mailbag that the GOP fundraising coffers will be lighter this cycle because rich donors are more likely to write a check to Texas A&M or Bama to sign a 5-star in the NIL transfer portal than to win a tight House race in a swing district. Also believe the theory that the Weimar analogies will always be retarded because the energy and fervor that would go into political street games and brawling will always be subsumed by rabid sports ball fandom and gambling. Little Saturdays are for the boys. My personal pet theory is that the U.S. population is massively underestimated. There are easily 500 million people in the U.S., with roughly 100 million of them off the books living outside the system. I've been hearing this 300-something million number since elementary school 20 years ago, and this 20 to 30 million illegals estimate has been used since the Reagan or Clinton era. England has tried to get a semi-accurate head count multiple times in the past 20 years when they tried to roll out a national ID a while back, and then after Section 8 high-rise burned down a few years ago. And both times they had to pull the plug not even halfway through the count because the real numbers were so much higher than the official numbers. Well, I guess the question, so I agree with my points on that. So I guess on the amount of people here, I could see 500 million is probably more. There are way more Hispanics here than what is counted in the census, which you can go, speaking about rural America, because in rural America it's like hot blondes everywhere. Imagine, dude, you go to rural America and you'll go to a gas station and there'll be Indians at the counter. And then you go to the, local Walmart and there's Hispanics loitering around waiting for jobs. It's like, what is going on here? Are more likely the Home Depot if they have one. So it's like, all right, if you go in, you'll go see tons of Hispanics there. The Hispanic head count, it's around 20%. There are way more Hispanics and other immigrant groups here than I think are being counted. They always worried that they were undercounting blacks, but then they did a real effort to ensure that they get proper head counts of them in the census. And so I think the black numbers are about right. But it's around 12%, 13%. It might be off by 1 or 2 points. But Hispanic population, I think, it probably is higher than, it's probably would be massively undercounted. And so if we have more people here living off the books, I don't think it's 100 million. It's just way too hard to live off the system from 100 million. That would be bad news for some of the people I've been arguing over the weekend. But, 30 million or so people living off the books, or maybe 50 million is probably about right. I mean, that's how many illegals we have. Now, the thing about illegals, the numbers estimate is that a lot of illegals do go back. So it's not a permanent number. A lot of them just make money and then they go back to Guatemala or Mexico. And so they go back and forth between the border. And so it's not that it's and also when they have kids, their kids are no longer illegal immigrants. So they don't really replicate themselves. They unfortunately turn out American citizens. So it likely now is probably 30 million illegals. And they claim the census counts them, but I don't think so. So I don't know if it's half a billion. I think 400 million would be there. The problem with this is this becomes more of a black pill, because if it was 400 million people that they're undercounting, they probably would be overcounting whites, because whites are the people most likely to oh yeah, I'm filling out the census. And the people they're undercounting are these illegal immigrants and other immigrant communities that they've just been bringing people in, and they're not aware that they're here or whatever. And so there could be a lot more illegals here than we imagine. So let's say that they're not properly accounting for 50 million people. The people that they're primarily wouldn't be accounting for are non-whites and immigrants. And that would probably put the white number close to 50%. And you would, I mean, you'd be surprised at like seeing like America's only 20% Hispanic. That's like, I see Hispanics there's not a place you can go where you won't see them. And it's even the same and it's starting to be the same with Indians. And so I do think we're undercounting those two groups and a few others. But I'd have to look into it. I don't think it's 500 million. I think the resource drain on that would be coming up more often. But I could see, maybe 50 million more. We're close to 350 million now. I think it's 330 million. And then it's not always been 300 million. It was still under 300 million when I was in school. I think we hit 300 million sometime when I was in high school. So it's not always been that case. And people are having fewer kids now. So, there's that population growth metric going there too. And we didn't, and the 20 and 30 million illegals, we didn't have that many under Reagan. I mean, we would have amnestied like 20 million if it had happened under Reagan. The 11 million figure has just been a guesstimate from the Bush era. And it's likely been higher, but depending on how the economy, a lot of people left during the Great Recession, but then they returned during in the later years of Obama and some a little bit under Trump, and obviously they've all been rolling in since under Biden. So, and we're not thoroughly accounting them for. So, that would be my take on it. But we almost don't want this to be true, because if it is true, it's not white people that they're undercounting; it's everyone else. So that is a point. Second question he has: you made an astute point a couple months ago when you said the plausible avatars for the composition of the American political class in 20, 30 years could be Vivek versus Pramila Jayapal, anti-woke, or she's not here's ways, anti-woke tech CEO with high verbal IQ and amorphous views versus woke Brahmin political commissar whose entire reason in life is punishing the people who mispronounce her name once in middle school or said her lunch smell bad. I'm not sure how much interaction the listeners, much less the average normie, might have had with these upper middle class subcontinentals from maybe college or a white collar job. If you haven't, just go to a Costco on a Saturday in any affluent area. But they do have that unique striver and very self-conscious uppity characteristic. Like you pointed out, while East Asians are happy to collect credentials and be middle managers, the South Asians go after power, i.e. the governments of the entire British Isles. Looking back, I'm kicking out loud at your Twitter gem outs against the Brahmin Brigade 3 to 4 years ago, like the lone East India Company official facing down a sepoy revolt. A lot of people aren't really familiar yet with the hilarious internal lore and the internecine keeping up with the Joneses that goes on with the Shriver Indians in the U.S. leasing BMWs, buying the most expensive house you can with no furniture, etc. Even if one of them owns like 50 Econo Lodges or Motel 6 with a balance sheet of 20 million, they will get flexed in if the Patel sons gets into Northwestern Medical School. Definitely rambled here and not really a question. Just passing you the baton to Keck with. Yeah, no. That is true with the Indians. They are they are an important group that they're going to be gaining more power. And to double that, it's like East Asians, they don't really have the desire for power that South Asians do. South Asians really want the influential positions. They're much more political than East Asians. They're also stick to their cultural identity group much more than East Asians. A lot of East Asians, they mix and then, they're like half Korean, and then they don't maintain their traditions. They don't give their kids Korean names. They become, by all accounts, standard Americans with different eye features. And that becomes with them. But most Hapas are like white liberals, so it's not quite the assimilation we want. But with Indians, they really maintain a strong identity into the next generation. Maybe it's that they stick more to the religion, to Hinduism and Sikhism more than a lot of East Asians do. They're also much more clannish than East Asians. They're much more into their identity group and affiliate group and cultural groups than East Asians. So, and that's just going to be a problem of how they're very clannish. The way of like how they blow all their money on stuff, all these immigrant groups are like that, like Armenians, Arabs, Persians. They're all like will like spend an assload of money on this stuff and live beyond their means in order to have that type of status. And WASP are not into that. It's very anti-WASP behavior, and like buy flashy clothes and stuff as signaling. It's a very kind of primitive way of signaling wealth, but from the cultures they come from, that's how they do that. And when they come to America, they want to have the flashy cars and gigantic houses that they can't really afford, but they'll just do that anyway. So, interesting observations from Fake Cell Eradicator. Now a question from K-Max. He says, a clear and direct short question here. What is Barstool conservatism, and does it apply to the Greer heads? I have just recently heard of this term, Barstool conservatism. Can I declare Scott Greer Barstool conservative? No, you cannot. Barstool conservatism, I'm working on a concept of this. I think there's a better way of saying this than Barstool conservatism. It was invented by this guy, Matt Walter, and it's a very much a trad boogeyman that they want to imagine is what happened in conservatism, because they feel that conservatism is losing its social conservative edge. It's becoming more libertine, and it's just wanting to party all the time, and that's what they want to be about. And what they imagine that Barstool conservatism is socially liberal, economically conservative, but it's like anti-woke. Now, there are aspects of this among certain sorts, but they'd have to pinpoint who actually is a Barstool conservative, because Barstool itself is not political. And it's a very apolitical thing. I mean, they might be like, I'm voting for Trump because I'm paying too much in taxes. But at the same time, they're like, I don't want to vote for Trump because he's restricting abortions. You know, it's all over the place. And you'd have to look at political figures that actually represent Barstool conservatism. Trump doesn't himself. In his own way, he doesn't reflect that. But there are others who might. Actually, you can't really find one, because everyone has to pretend to be social conservative or more socially conservative than they are. And a lot of the base is getting into Christian nationalism and other things, which some of these trats don't like Matt Walter, because of the particular brand of Christianity that's involved in that. But I wouldn't really even say that's Barstool conservatism. I would have said I did write an article about this on Elon Musk, on what he's about. And I'd said, he sort of is like a Barstool conservative, but in reality, he's not. He's something else. Now, I mean, at that time when he bought Twitter, he's like, I just want free speech and people to, do what they want. But we are having free speech and we're not having the school marms tell us what to do. But it's something very different now. So I wouldn't say Barstool conservatism. So the thing about Barstool conservatism is that it's not reflected quite so in politics, even though I do think there is a voter demographic like this. I think a lot of the young people who are going to vote for Trump but not really involved in politics have this mindset. But I think a better way of saying this is Morgan Wallen whiteness is the term I would use. And Morgan Wallen whiteness, it's more of a cultural vibe that we're seeing in America. And it's reflected in Barstool. It's reflected in Pat McAfee. It's reflected in Luke Combs and some of these other country artists who are becoming popular. And what it means is this kind of young, bro-y cultural sentiment and stance where they don't like woke. They want to have the right to say the N-word as they say it in rap songs, not in a racist way, as Morgan Wallen said it when he got in trouble. Used the A, not the ER version of it. They just want to sing along to their favorite rap songs. And they want to be left alone to gamble and sports bet. And they don't like politics invading their space, primarily sports or sports gambling or partying. And there's a latent support for Trump, but they're not really that into politics, as can be seen in McAfee and these country artists. And they just really want to have a good time and be against these woke weirdos who want to tell them how to live. But there's not really a political philosophy behind it. There's not a politics behind it. It's just a vibe. And that's what they're about. And it's also definitively white. Like Morgan Wallen is not, even though he might do collaborations with rappers and use a rap slang, he is definitively a white guy. So is Luke Combs and Pat McAfee. But at the same, there's not a real racial angle to that. But they'll sometimes notice racial things, like Pat McAfee's comments on Caitlin Clark being like they all hate her because this white bitch is really good. And people got mad for him saying white bitch, which he was praising Caitlin Clark. And so they'll make observations like that, but they primarily just like, I don't want to be involved in politics. I don't want politics to be invade what I'm focused on. I probably will vote for Trump. I don't really like Biden. I don't like wokeness, but what I really want to focus on is these hobbies and interests. And I think it's better to say this is like Morgan Wallenism than it is to say Barstool conservatism, because Barstool conservatism implies that it's actually a distinct political ideology, that it's having influence over politics. But even if you look at the way the right is working right now, it's not reflective of that. I do think the right is changing on social attitudes. It is very much more forgiving of faux pas of its politicians. I mean, look at how they handle Marjorie Taylor Greene's cheating, Lauren Boebert's many ordeals, and now Lauren Boebert is like, we need to teach the 10 Commandments in school so kids are moral, and it's like the Boebert family might need to learn up on some of this stuff. Even with Matt Gaetz, some of the stuff he's been accused of, Trump obviously, and even Kristi Noem being accused of affairs. Like, there's much more of a forgiving attitude towards people violating the old codes around social conservatism than there was 20 years ago. So that is a change, but I don't think that's quite reflective in the base or a particular activist segment or even politicians, because all these politicians still have to be socially conservative. And the type of socially liberal, economically conservative attitude and pro-libertine but anti-woke, there are people like that, but they're not that involved in politics. It's more of a vibe than a political ideology. So in conclusion, do not call me a Barstool conservative. I'm much more than that. So that is that. Oh, Kingslander got a question in right at the nick of time. Wow, good. Good. He made sure it's for the main podcast, so I'm obligated to say this. And he says, if Trump wins the 2024 election, do you think it will have been better or worse than that he lost the 2020 election? On one hand, had he won in 2020, a lot of the worst excess of liberal insanity could have been avoided. On the other hand, if he had won, the lib media could have potentially kept milking the Trump hysteria train for another 4 years. Whereas in 2024 and beyond, a less competent media class and depoliticized general public may be more beneficial to enacting his more controversial policy goals, like mass deportation and clawing back at civil rights law of the state bureaucracy. You know what? I'm inclined to agree it was better that he lost the 2020 election, but it's too early to say. We'd have to see what he does when he wins in 2024 and what he's capable to do. I think that there are more opportunities for him to achieve what he wants now than if he had won in 2020. In 2020, it would have just been insane levels of hysteria. Insane levels of hysteria if he had won. And I don't know what... And Democrats would be cruising to a 2024 victory due to just like all, the type of things probably that would have been happening. I could have seen more of a Republican backlash against him, maybe developing. The one good thing is that we wouldn't have had 10 million illegals come here. We've had a much smaller number of illegals. And maybe the Ukraine war wouldn't have happened. So, all those direct things would have been better if he had won. But at the same time, he has more opportunities to achieve goals we like if he wins in 2024 than if he didn't win in 2020. So it all just depends on your perspective. On one hand, we've had fewer illegal immigrants, no war in Ukraine. I think we've had a much better foreign policy situation. But also, he was already planning to do this anti-CRT stuff in going into 2021. But I think the cultural shift could have been worse. We could have had insane levels of censorship. Debanking could have become widespread if Trump had won. there could have just been this like incredible level of backlash that was maintained over the last 4 years under Trump. And they may have, I don't know, and they would have maintained the COVID lockdowns longer just to spite Trump. And just like a lot of things, I think that life would have been, life in some ways outside of the direct issues of like other things happening in the world, it could have been worse just because liberals are just, would have been a lot crazier. And also I think they could be picked a very radical Democrat who was leading the polls against whoever Republicans picked. Probably would, maybe, I don't know who the hell it would have been if Trump was leaving office. They could have had a very radical Democrat who looks like they're going to win, and all those achievements could be wiped away, and we could be getting full race communism and after 2024. So I don't know. That's a hypothetical. But on the other hand, things would have otherwise been better under Trump. But yeah, so it just depends on your perspective. And I'm going to take the perspective of what can be achieved in this second term versus what could have been achieved in the second term starting in 2021. More can be achieved now. Conservatism, the commentary, the energy, the rhetoric is much better right now. It's much more directed in an identitarian fashion than it was in 2020. He could have also been pushed into doing really stupid things by what the base was like. I like the base. Republicans and conservatives were not as good, not as solid, not as dependable on immigration in 2020 and 2021 as they are now. They weren't. They were also not as good on foreign. Well, you can debate over foreign policy. The large number of Republicans opposing the Ukraine funding, and a majority of them, wanting to cut funding, is a positive development. But that wasn't there in 2020 and 2021. So just the grounds are better for a second term this year than they were in 2020. So I would say that if from that perspective, yes, it would have been better that Trump is going to win now than he did keeping the presidency in 2020. But at the same time, we would have stopped a lot of bad things if Trump had been president. Now we're going to end with New England refugee, and he asks. He says he's down by the ignorance of people. Most of our worldview can be proven with a quick Google image search of the IQ map of the world. Let's say Jim Nance, who I believe is the most trusted man in America, hijacked a sports broadcast and laid down tons of keyed facts and arguments. Would it sway people to our side? Do you think the hoi polloi just don't know the facts, or do they believe things like 1358 are fake? I just think they don't care. I don't think Jim Nance telling them to believe this stuff would make a difference. I think that would have made a difference in the 70s and 80s when everyone was tuned in to these TV broadcasts, and what media commentators said mattered a lot more. Now we're so, bifurcated, and I don't know if bifurcated, multi-bifurcated, but we're just so, with our cultural interests and where we get news and information is just so all over the place now that it's hard for just one person to make that difference. And I think why they don't really care about these issues is they just don't think about them. It doesn't affect them. If you bring it up, why are you bringing this up? You're ruining my beach trip. I'm focused on the game right now. Don't bring this stuff up. And I just think that they don't really care. They're focused on other things. They don't think about big picture items. This is why they're NPCs and they don't connect dots. But that's fine. I think we can push these people in the right direction to at least voting the right way, and to understanding basic facts such as immigrants are, you don't want more immigration, you don't want more diversity. Diversity is not a good thing. And I think you can push them in the direction of basic understandings and basic sentiments. But it'll take a lot of time and a lot of media and a lot of education and a lot of propagandizing for them to achieve that effect. And so, but I am confident we can do this. So on that note, we're going to end today's podcast. That is it for Highly Respected this week. We've got more great content coming up this week. Also a note, next week I'm going to be not in the normal Highly Respected headquarters. So we're going to be doing things a little bit differently. We're going to still have content all 5 days, every day of the week. But mailbag is most likely going to be written I'll have it behind a paywall. I'll respond in written form because I don't know if I'm going to have, you know, I don't know if I'm going to have the time to record it or be in the situation to record it. So be on vacation. And so if you want to have a question answered by me talking about it, make sure you get in the question by Friday morning, because that's when I'm going to be recording the highly respected episode for Monday. Hopefully there's not breaking news for the weekend. I have a feeling there will be, but it'll be okay. We'll still have a great episode no matter what. So that is it for highly respected this week. More great content coming up this week, so be on the lookout for that. So until next time, stay respected.